Hello and welcome to Dateline London. Germany votes to increase the money available to bail out the Eurozone, but will it work this time? The King of Saudi Arabia talks of votes for women, and Britain's Conservative Party gather at its annual conference for next week. Well, my guests today are Nabila Ramdani, the French-Algerian writer and broadcaster, Henry Chu of the LA Times, Thomas Kielinger of Die Welt, and Polly Toynbee of The Guardian. Very good to see you. Euro first, and Chancellor Angela Merkel received overwhelming political support in the Bundestag this week for making more funds available to bail out Eurozone countries in trouble. But is it enough? Is it too late? And will the German people support the decisions of their politicians? Your paper, Thomas, had a poll saying more than 50% of Germans would like the Deutschmark back.
Well, yes, but they're unenlightened, as it were, about what would happen if we had the Deutschmark back.
Oh, the German elite is now speaking, isn't it?
No. This is the facts and figures of life. And single German currency, again, would immediately appreciate so dramatically as to collapse overnight our advantage in export and other businesses.
It'd be the Swiss problem, but in a much bigger economy.
I think that has not been sufficiently been told by our political elite. Why are the Germans continuing to fund this enterprise? And when will they have to be bailed out from the ignominy of it all? Well, I think Germans don't want to be in a position to be the first ones to pull the plug on any European country like Greece in this case. I think they're going to continue for a while because Europe has been our own vocation, our only vocation since World War II. The Germans felt very uncomfortable in their own national skin, as it were, after the catastrophe of our national history. And so Europe was our new home. And we don't want to sort of abandon it, or be seen to be abandoned it, so we won't be the first to administer the coup de grâce to Greece. It will have to be someone else, or some other sets of circumstances, or some collective decision to do it. But you won't be seeing the Germans uniquely doing it by themselves, so they will continue to sacrifice.
But it will happen, do you think? Is that your gut feeling?
I would imagine, well, everyone's saying it's just following expert advice. I'm not an economist, but
the experts have not entirely come to themselves.
Well, which experts you choose? I mean, we are just hoping that somehow Greece might reform herself in the structural area, like collecting more taxation and privatizing more business and so forth. The austerity program is visibly not going to work because it's going to choke off growth in Greece. So you're not expecting too much on that end, but some of the structural reforms might sort of make a headway, but it's just hoping against hope, really.
Do you think Merkel actually understands how grave the crisis is now? She's always been dithering from the beginning, and so even now she fails to bring across the message to the German people how important it is that they keep the euro for their own economy's sake.
Well,
this is not being brought across.
But Henry, she understands it fully. And let me just explain historically why it is so strange that the popular opinion is hugely weighted against what the parliamentarians have decided. Every major decision that Germany took after World War II under the original administration of Konrad Adenauer, whether it was rearming, whether it was becoming a member of NATO, or allowing American nuclear forces on our soil, was taken against the obvious the vox populi at the time. It was always thus, that there was a discrepancy between the parliamentarians and popular opinion. We think we are a representative democracy, not one that goes for plebiscites or referenda. But it will only be okay for the time being. You're quite right. The chicken will come home to roost. The bills will have to be paid. Yeah. But it won't be Germany, just to repeat, to pull the plug on an individual country.
We in this country owe a huge debt to the Germans, and I think that we are extraordinarily arrogant. We wave fingers at them saying, go on, pay more, without offering a penny ourselves. Our own fate is absolutely inextricably caught up in this. I look at the way the Germans behave. I look at Angela Merkel's bravery on this. I look at that overwhelming vote right across a whole lot of parties in the German parliament to do the right thing, to pay out an enormous amount of money for a country that they regard as profligate. And I think that's real political bravery. Would we do this in this country? You bet we wouldn't, even though we need the Eurozone to survive desperately. Even George Osborne says, we really hope this works. We hope that this will hold the line.
Indeed, because he knows how.
We are holding our breath, hoping that it does, and we should thank and praise the Germans rather than constantly waving a finger and asking for more.
There are those who say, you were in favour of the euro, Britain joining the euro.
I was wrong, I'm afraid.
You were wrong, and you've said that you were wrong on that. That this is simply exposing the fundamental flaws of the Eurozone. In fact, Eurosceptics and Europhiles tend to agree on that.
Yes.
But it is exposing the flaws, and it may be good money after bad because it's a constant series of bigger and bigger sticking plasters. That's the argument.
Just a little footnote. Thank you for calling the Germans so brave, but it's only for an interim period. The IMF and other bodies that met in Washington last week, already agreed that the sums agreed upon now are insufficient.
Yeah, talking about trillion euros.
Yeah, the Germans themselves don't know, while they realize that they have to, sacrifice something, they don't know how long for, and where is the exit, as it were, where's the end game? And the fear of the unknown, I think, at the moment is gripping the country.
But this will help to prop up banks in Germany, in France, that are in real peril, so that it isn't money all wasted, because those banks are going to, at some point or another, going to need propping up anyway, and if it does all come unstuck, that money will still have been needed. So it's not just like it going down a black hole.
Nabila, it might be Sarkozy who performs the coup de grace on Greece, because he isn't bound by the same kind of history as the Germans, but he is bound by the same kind of fears, I suppose.
Well, I think the French and the Germans have shown how committed they were to rescue the Eurozone. But I think it should be noted that Angela Merkel's won her own majority after narrowly, effectively, averting the collapse of her government, only after pledging that there would be no grand plan committing Germany to vast and unlimited liabilities. And I think that sums up the position of the Germans in general. Why should they, as an economic powerhouse, have to bail lesser performing countries over and over again? And the Germans are effectively becoming as Eurosceptic as the British, which is saying something.
Well, there's an element of that, but I talked to a German government minister this week who echoed some of the things that you said, because she said after the war we were given a hand up by the European Union, and as it was then, it was slightly different construction, but we were helped by other Europeans. We were helped to rebuild, and we owe that debt.
And that's, Nabila, where you can really bet your bottom dollar that Germans will understand that they owe a huge debt of gratitude to the European edifice and to the European community of nations, having readmitted ourselves into the circle of democratic countries. And they also know that they've benefited from the euro.
Let's just be clear, too, about what it is we're losing here. The whole European idea is in great jeopardy. What was wrong with the idea of the Eurozone was not the wrong idea. It was done too fast, too soon, with countries that were too incompatible. The idea was still brilliant, and if it had started with countries that really had similar economies and gradually grown as countries got richer, and so that there was an ever closer union of people who could realistically unite, that's the sadness. And now the whole thing may be destroyed and blow apart and never happen again.
It's more to do than just having similar economic agendas. It's having similar political agendas. And I think the Eurozone is as much about economy as it is about politics.
Okay, let's move on, because there were some signs of possible reform in Saudi Arabia this week. Talk of maybe allowing women to vote, the king stepping in to prevent a woman who'd driven a car from being lashed. It comes as Bahrain's jails doctors and nurses for helping those injured in the Arab Spring protests. So do we really expect some kind of serious reforms in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states? Nabila?
Well, I think what it shows is that absolute Gulf monarchies are not immune to the kind of political turmoils that have been going on in the region. And that's why these countries also realize, Saudi Arabia in particular realizes that it's not immune to that kind of, as I said, turmoil. And that's why it's muting radical reforms. But I think this plan to allow women to run for elections at the municipal level would be a grand plan indeed for women in Saudi Arabia, but also it's largely tokenistic and unconvincing in the extreme.
Because it's tokenistic with men, because the men can vote in Saudi Arabia too, but they don't vote because actually there's not very much to vote for. It doesn't really count. I mean, that's part of the problem.
Well, absolutely. The idea is that you cannot hold the leaders accountable. And that's why it's even more tokenistic. But women won't even be allowed to apply to hold roles in cabinet as cabinet ministers, for example. They won't be allowed to drive or to travel abroad without permission or without a male guardian. So I think that exposes the contradictions within Saudi Arabia, how effectively saying that a woman will be allowed to stand for election, but she will have to have a man driver to drive her to parliament.
Yeah, I saw a Twitter that said Saudi women can vote now on foot. You know, they can get to the polling stations, and I think we need to be realistic about just what change is being offered here. You're right that they can vote, they can even run in elections for local councils that are completely neutered of power. I mean, and so the fact that this is a step forward for women's franchise, yes, that would be news in 1911, not 2011.
And the fact that it's only planned for 2015 adds insults to,
There's been even male permission for all these advancements in their rights. They still have to have a male accompaniment to allow them to go ahead, to vote and to do all these things.
Well, what's interesting is that every little door that opens a crack simply makes the internal contradictions more and more absurd. So everything they give away, which is often the way with revolutions, they feel the pressure, they're afraid of what they're seeing in the Arab Spring, so they open the door a little bit, and that makes things even worse. It doesn't actually improve the situation for them. I think that it's high time that we and all these other countries simply said we'll have no more dealings with these regimes. We are utterly up to our neck in blood in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia, and we should apologise, step back, support the opposition, and have no more commitment to that.
On that question of Bahrain, because that is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, it's very difficult to find anybody in Western Europe or in North America, for example, who would think that this is anything other than quite despicable, to jail doctors and nurses for doing their job, which is to help people.
Absolutely. People have been sentenced to death for carrying out their duties, but also women and children have been imprisoned as well, and indeed tortured. And it just shows that there's no appetite to even, threaten in any way that part of the world, Bahrain being an annex of Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, I was going to say that's the dilemma, isn't it, for Western governments, which is that they may talk about democracy, but they want docility, and they want peace and quiet in most of the Arab region, particularly those countries that produce oil. I mean, that is the realpolitik.
Barack Obama didn't mention Saudi Arabia once in his Middle East speech back in May. There's no chance that Saudi Arabia will even be forced to, reform much more deeper Saudi society by countries surrounding it, precisely because it's subsidizing all the countries in the region. There's no chance that Saudi Arabia will be pressured into reforming the country by Western countries who are very much in bed with Saudi Arabia. So the change is bound to come from within. And what's happening with women getting even more political is a sign of that the change will come from domestically.
I think the Saudi king is now coming to the realization that he's not completely immune. The kingdom is not immune. But what he has, which Egypt and other governments in the area didn't have, is pots of money. And in fact, he's trying to deploy that. He, I think, earlier this year offered nearly $100 billion in some incredible package that he could offer personally to try to allay economic anger. And I think that's something that's going for him, as well as Western silence.
Should dedicate that will European Rescue Fund, please, next time.
And this will keep the Arab Spring from lapping on his shores as much as he might.
Our continued support will be dependent on him propping up the Eurozone.
Well, I don't know. We will take all comers.
Polly, do you have any optimism that, we heard the Cairo speech and we've also seen what actually happens on the ground. We've heard about the distaste in the Arab world for the way in which the United States has suggested it will veto the moves by the Palestinians at the United Nations and so on. Do you think the West truly has much leverage that it's prepared to use in Bahrain or anywhere else?
It has leverage in Bahrain, certainly. Has huge leverage. Whether it's prepared to use it is another question. I suspect not. I defer to Henry, but I can't see the US pulling out of Bahrain in a hurry.
No, not when crossing Bahrain means crossing Saudi Arabia, yeah. Of course, my touchstone on this is always The Simpsons, where they had an episode in which Bart said, yes, it says American as our 51st state, Saudi Israelia. And in some ways, we will not cross either of those nations, whether Saudi Arabia or Israel.
But we have to travel in optimism. We have to believe that in our lifetimes, democracy has spread ineluctably across the globe, and it will continue to do so. I mean, it's quite remarkable if you looked at a map of the world when we were born and how it is now. Democracy happens sooner or later, and women's rights. These things do happen.
And dying for them. And these cultures are just coming a little later in the scheme of things. But we're never contemporaneous in our cultural developments on the globe. Each country has its own sort of rhythm to follow. So we shouldn't be too kind of pedagogical about it.
Well, I think we also have to be vigilant, because although I agree that the map may look very different now in terms of where democracies can be drawn, whether they're pursuing liberal democracy in the way that we think they ought is another story entirely. What's happening
is it good
in
enough?
Egypt
Is your democracy or ours good enough? Goodness me, look at the American Constitution and the appalling state it's in. You know, look at a lot of non-democratic behaviour in this country. It's never perfect. Democracy is always a work in progress.
Nabila, there are those who suggest that it could actually, I was talking to a couple of experts in the region in the past week who suggest things could actually go backwards. It could become more conservative in Saudi Arabia, that there is a compact between the religious leaders and the political leaders, and that no matter what the king has done, no matter how this little door has opened, the succession question, which many people in Saudi Arabia find it impossible to discuss, means that you could actually have a more conservative state in 5 years' time than that.
Well, I think that's one of the fears that you know, we should be considering. Yes, but I think the fact that the ruling family in Saudi Arabia is now muting radical reforms is a show of weakness. I think it says a lot about the need for change in order not to go back effectively.
It's so bizarre that there is Saudi Arabia, which is the viper's nest of Wahhabism that is causing all of the terrorism and trouble around the world and ferment within so many countries, is in this absolutely unbreakable bond with the countries it's destroying. In the end, surely that can't
It's our dependency. Our energy dependency on Saudi Arabia is the linchpin of all this, and
well,
that
that's
reduces
why
our
we need a
leverage.
Green New Deal, so that Europe can be, and you're
It's happening.
heading that
it's happening.
way,
Well, Britain
to be
too,
independent
in developing new renewable energy technology.
Yeah.
That's the way to go.
But in the meantime, we will just watch The Simpsons for further political developments. Let's move on to British politics now, because British politics took an interesting turn this week with a speech by the leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband, in which he tried to stake out new ground. This comes as the Conservatives are meeting for their annual conference, with the Prime Minister David Cameron personally doing well in the opinion polls, yet also trying to avoid a row on Europe and other causes dear to his party's right wing, and also a row, as we've seen today, about whether he's doing enough to stimulate growth in the economy. But looking backwards first, Polly, this week, Ed Miliband, did he emerge after a year as a credible Prime Minister in waiting?
Still up in air. I think that I think that a lot of people who've spent, like me, decades going to party conferences, here at least was a speech with substance and meaning, trying to say something. We've been used to so many vapid television-oriented performances. It wasn't very good on telly. He's not a great one for delivering it. It wasn't brilliantly crafted. It was too long. So most people will never have seen its content, because they'll get 3 little clips on the news and that's all. And they'll just judge him on his performance. But the people who were there and thoughtful, and many of the thoughtful commentators, some of them on the right as well as on the left, realised that he's trying to seize hold of something. Since we've had this great crash, nobody has said, so what does this mean for how we go forward? Are we going to allow predatory companies, predatory banks and financiers to really rule countries and democracies to some extent? Or are we going to try and break that and say we can have a better capitalism with better regulation? It's not anti-capitalist, but it's an idea of benevolent capitalism.
But forgive me, Polly, haven't we seen that debate already to curtail the excesses of banking behaviour?
A little.
Well, more regulation is going to certainly come into play. So it's not such a novel idea to me. It's just the language that they use, calling these badly behaved banks predators and other institutions.
And other companies too, not just banks.
Yeah, but I have the feeling that
the private equity movement that has gobbled up.
Yeah, but the discussion that we can't go on as like we used to, not business as usual. That's the phrase he used. I'm not anti-business. I'm anti-business as usual. I had a feeling that I've heard that before since 2008. Have we not? Since the collapse of Lehman Brothers.
I don't remember that phrase in particular, but you're right that having a stand now against banks is nothing new. All politicians everywhere are doing that. Whether they're actually enacting any policies that put force behind their words is another story. I mean, I think Ed Miliband is always going to be hampered, unfortunately, by performance. And because we live in an age where now in Britain you will have debates on television between the prime ministerial candidates, this is going to be a hindrance for him. And unless he can, I think, shape up his performance in a way that can appeal to the electorate on a very basic level, I think it's going to be an uphill battle.
He'll be good in debates. A set-piece speech is a monstrous, old-fashioned kind of bit of nonsense. I think in actual debates, hand-to-hand combat, I think he'll be quite good. good. He's got good arguments.
Then he'd be better doing a question and answer session.
I think he should abolish the speech. If I were leaders, I'd all of them abolish the speech. Virtually nobody hears it. It costs them agony to write it. Weeks and weeks of time wasted. Much better to just get out there, be themselves and answer questions. They all do better that way.
Be themselves, a bit dangerous. You can see the handlers immediately going, oh, we don't want that. What did you think of, looking backwards, and then we'll look forwards to the Conservatives in a minute?
Well, I think party conferences are always very well scripted, and I think that's what we'll see at the Conservative Party conference as well. And I think, I still don't know what the Conservatives are all about, who they are, what they represent, and I think that will be the chance to do some explanation work and say if they would like to portray themselves as a more traditional party, which the grassroots will expect from them, or indeed as a modernist, have a modernist agenda, which pursue the modernist agenda which got them elected in the first place.
Well, I mean, to go back to your point about performance, it's also a bit about what people think of as character, even if we don't personally meet Miliband and Cameron and all the others, Clegg. When you see Cameron on TV, if you look at the opinion polls, he's liked as a person, and that's really important, isn't it, when he goes into this conference? It's important,
but how much longer it'll go on being important for? You're beginning to see some very important switches in attitude, that people who started off saying the deficit is absolutely the most important thing, comes before everything else, they totally bought that. Now the cuts are beginning to hit. For the first time, polls are switching around to say, actually, we think it's going too far, too fast. They're seeing jobs going, they're seeing the effect of the cuts, and in the next year it'll be very, very much more severe. Most households, apart from the top 10%, are going to lose permanently 7% of their income. That's an enormous loss, not seen since the 1920s. In the end, bread and butter matters more than the charm of the leader.
But interestingly, I think it doesn't seem to aid and abet Miliband much at this point in time, with crisis around. It's very hard as an opposition leader to really profile yourself as a future contender for the highest office. So if you have 4 more years until the next election, or 3.5, so that's a very hard time, no fairness to him.
But Labour's still a bit ahead in the polls. On the whole, the poll of polls, Labour's still a bit ahead, surprisingly. Well, you might say so that leadership isn't everything.
I think for the Conservatives, gimmicky concepts like the big society won't cut it. Effectively, what the big society is all about is what I call a do-it-yourself society, a DIY society, asking charities to take over the role of the state when charity funding is being cut as well. And also, I always like to quote Anna and Bevan's quote, charity is no substitute for social justice, and that's what people want.
But they also, I mean, it looks as if we're going to have a change of policy in putting some money into helping people get their bins collected once a week. And it sounds trivial, but you can't tell you how irritated some people get about things like that, and that works in politics, doesn't it?
When suddenly money becomes available for these things, it suddenly becomes available, as we see, even though cuts are being instituted in so many other places. I mean, I think they can play it cleverly that way, but in terms of actually trying to change the direction they're going, so many opinions are now coming out from the IMF of all sources saying you need to concentrate on job creation, you need to concentrate on economic growth. Austerity cuts cannot be anything.
From within the Conservative Party too. I mean, exactly. A very prominent backbencher has said, you know, you haven't got a growth agenda. What's going on here? We have to grow our way out of it.
And I think that's not just in Britain. You see that all across Europe. That's happening with the discussions over Greece, that austerity cannot solve everything. It's got to be about growth, and that's happening here as well.
Britain has voluntarily chosen the most austere of all any other country. All right, Greece is getting self-imposed on it, and who knows if they can live with it or not. But we have volunteered to have the most austere, toughest cuts. You know, 22,000 people thrown out of the armed forces, that kind of thing. 20% cut in the police at a time when crime is likely to be rising. I mean, these are really ferocious, and it's only beginning to happen. I don't believe that this doesn't impact on the government of the day, and I'm not surprised they are still a bit behind in the polls.
Thomas? And exactly what you say. That's no reason, therefore, why bin collection, if you increase it, is going to refloat the economy. It has to come from somewhere else.
Or perhaps we're producing quite a lot of
more
rubbish.
Capital spending. You're quite right. I mean, Britain is in a rather unique position. It has lowest government bond yields. It could spend on capital. It could go for big projects. Something has to refloat the economy.
We can borrow negatively. It costs us less to borrow. We could then lend it again at a profit. I mean, it's unbelievable how cheap
but it only, I mean, the argument, as you know, Polly, is it only costs us less to borrow because we are being so austere and frugal. That's the argument.
But there
we'll
you
hear
have
for
the
next few days.
CBI, our industrialists, who are on the whole very right-wing, saying, for heaven's sake, build houses, build infrastructure, build railways, build energy, build power stations, and get the economy going. Even they are saying this. So the deficit is beginning to fade as being the Tories sort of winning
ticket. And no one's saying open the floodgates wide. I mean, people are just talking about small increments that could actually make a difference.
5 billion capital spending would go a long way.
And don't call it stimulus, because that's a discredited word now, but call it capital spending.
Call it investment for essential infrastructure for the sake of the economy.
The credit rating is very good.
Just to return to where we began, is there going to be a row on Europe at the Conservative Party conference this week? Because there's some people in Europe think that this is, or in the Tory party, who say now is the time to reshape it and our role in it, or not in it.
Well, it's an outrageous idea, but of course Europe is very, very unpopular in this country. If you had any kind of referendum with the word Europe in it, the answer would always be no in Britain for the foreseeable future. But the idea that we should use this crisis in the Eurozone to lever in a few little mean advantages for ourselves at a time when Germany is taking shouldering such a huge amount of the burden and we are offering nothing is outrageous. But I mean, maybe it'll play well with the people. It may. I hope that we have the politicians to be a bit magnanimous and say, listen, this is no time to try and sneak some advantage round the sides with bits of the social chapter
but
we
the
don't
Commission
like.
Commission could be a little wiser and not think of ideas like capital transfer tax and things like that at this point in time. So they could hold back a little bit and let
One
the
thing
debate.
that would be really popular with the people here is the idea that banks should contribute a little of the trillions that have been spent on propping them up. So I think a transaction tax is the one thing the British would vote for.
We'll leave it there. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We will be back next week at the same time. You can keep up to date with the programme by following me on Twitter at Gavin Essler. For now, from me, from all of us, goodbye.